The Iraq War is kicking off.
Yep.
What are your thoughts before the invasion happens? What are you thinking? What is your opinion of the situation?
It was a combination of things. So, being assigned to kind of the top unit in special operations, you have access to a lot of intelligence, a lot of information. I think we know more than your run of the mill soldier, or even your run of mill special operations guy. We're very involved in the planning process. We're very tuned in to the situation, and leading up to the invasion of Iraq. We firmly believed that Saddam possessed weapons of mass destruction, and we were tasked with conducting an overland desert mobility, entering from the west, and kind of crossing the Iraqi desert in advance of most other forces, kind of out by ourselves, trying to hit some of those ammo storage locations and other facilities that we believed, or the intelligence community believed, if they were going to be there, that's where they were going to be hidden. They weren't going to be in Baghdad or Tikrit. They were going to be tucked away someplace because he knew what was coming. So we were excited. We were excited to get after it. We did some really cool things leading up to it that most organizations would never do. The last time we were in the Gulf, or that unit was in the Gulf, was in 1991, during the first Gulf War. And the unit at the time did a desert mobility, and they were hunting Scud missiles out west, if you remember that. And we brought all those guys back in, both guys that were still in the service, and then even some retirees that participated in that mission back in 91. And we asked them, hey, if you guys were going to do this today, similar mission profile, what are the lessons learned? What are the things that you took away from that you wish you had, either a piece of technology that would have made you even better at it, or something you shouldn't have done that you would change if you did it again the second time? But we basically brought them in, and we learned from those past stories, those individuals that had done those operations, and we built kind of what we were going to do based on those lessons learned. And I thought that was pretty incredible. So leading up to the invasion, yeah, there's a lot of apprehension. When you're a special operations guy and you're crossing into a, denied territory in the hinterlands in an unarmored vehicle, and about 40 dudes, and that they have tanks and aircraft and all kinds of stuff, there's a little bit of hesitation there, but we were excited and ready to go do it.
So were you expecting, like you just said, tanks, aircraft, were you expecting immediate serious resistance, or did you guys think we're going to kind of sneak in, and if we're good about this, we can hit these targets before they even know we're coming?
Yeah, I mean, we knew a few things. We knew we had technology on our side. We had some assets. We had ground-based FLIR. It was the first time forward-looking infrared balls like they use on aircraft and boats were utilized on ground vehicles, and we had those. So we could see folks miles and miles away in the desert long before they ever heard, smelled, or saw us. We had close air support. We had an amazing arsenal of aircraft in support of our operations that were on call anytime we needed them, or at least within striking distance, that we knew we could call on if we needed it. And we had some anti-tank weapons and things like that were kind of organic to the stuff that we brought with us. So we were prepared. And we also knew we were really good at moving at night, secretly and silently, that we had a lot of assets on our side that could tell us where different things were in the battle space that kind of allowed us to leapfrog and progress. But the first night that we crossed in, kind of baptism by fire, Afghanistan was what it was. We did some assaults. Honestly, I never pulled the trigger on my first rotation of Afghanistan. So, you went through the motions and through flashbangs and blue door charges and all that stuff, just like normal. But most of those targets we prosecuted without anybody having to pull the trigger. It was just speed, surprise, and violence of action, and captured the guys we were after. But, this was different. So we're getting ready to cross the border of Iraq, and we had some helicopter assets in support of our operation. And there's 2 guard outposts way out. This is the western edge, so the border between Iraq and Saudi Arabia. And while we couldn't see them, we could listen to the radio calls, and just sitting there on the radio, getting ready to cross into Iraq, and listen to those helicopter pilots communicate with our higher headquarters about taking out those guard outposts and those radio towers so that basically we could cross undetected. That was an eye or ear opening moment, if you will. It was like, okay, this is real. We have just invaded a country, and there's nobody else in that country except us right now.
So when you say they take out the guard towers, what did they do? Did they hit them with a missile? When you say they took them out, what did they do?
Yeah, rockets and machine gun fire.
Gotcha.
Yeah, in the early state, it's an invasion. So unfortunately for those guards manning those towers way out there in the Western Desert, yeah, it was a bad night.
So now you guys are rolling in, you've crossed the border, you're in Iraq. At what point do you start meeting serious resistance when you're hitting these targets in the early days of the invasion?
Yeah, so it went pretty smoothly for a few days. It was cold actually early. We even had snow one night, way out there in the Western desert, but we'd kind of leapfrog through a few targets. So we would maneuver at night, hit an objective, continue to move off of that objective the next day until right before daylight. And then we would find a place to hide all the vehicles, in a wadi or a depression or something. And we would rest over day, as they say, or rod. And then we'd get up the next night and do the same thing. But on or about the night of April 1st, going into the morning of April 2nd, again, we had hit a number of targets. We had some small little skirmishes where, we had to deal with some Iraqi soldiers, but nothing that we didn't handle easily. But the morning of April 2nd, we drove a little too long. The sun had come up before we had gotten to our rest over day site. And we were compromised by a sheep herder out in the middle of the desert. We were a little concerned that someone saw us because we hadn't really encountered anyone out there at this point. But we, went on about our business. We found our rest over day site. We sort of set up our little perimeter as we do, put some guys out on security, and then the rest of us, bedded down to kind of try to get some sleep and do some maintenance and other things. And about 8:30 in the morning, gunfire erupted. We ended up getting hit basically on three sides. What had happened was that goat herder had gone into the local town or the closest one in proximity. And then through the series of phone calls and whatever, they had recruited basically every Fedayeen fighter that was within 100 square miles of us. And we ended up in an engagement on April 2nd with somewhere between the neighborhood of 350 and 400 Fedayeen fighters.
And how many of there are you? 40?
Yeah, I mean, all in all, with all the other assets that we had on the ground. Now, mind you, like we had mechanics with us. Believe it or not, we had some folks from some other agencies. We had kind of a hodgepodge. So there's probably about 50 or 60 guys total, but about 40 of those are shooters. And yeah, so overwhelming force. We took casualties right early on in the engagement because you're just out in the desert. We were kind of using these two depressions to give us some cover from the enemy fire, both RPG and machine gun, but they just kept coming. We ended up losing our first mate in that engagement, Andy Fernandez. Master Sergeant Andy Fernandez was killed April 2nd, 2003. And then we had a couple other guys get wounded from RPG fragmentation and whatnot, but we held our own until close air support could come in. We ended up literally decimating all of the enemy forces that were on site. And we ended up pulling out of there later that day and continued on with our mission.
That is, I got to be honest with you, nothing short of absolutely stunning. So you're outnumbered roughly 8-1 for the viewers at home, if I'm doing my math correctly. And not only do you hold out until the air support shows up, when it's all said and done, you wasted them, and then you continued on, pushing forward. I mean, that's nothing short of absolutely incredible. So at this point, you've made inroads. Where's the rest of the invasion at this point? Because I'm only 29 years old. So I was young when the Iraq War happened. I've read a lot about it. I'm fascinated by it. That's why I reached out for the interview. But I don't remember it like I remember, more recent events. That soon in the war, was the Iraqi military already kind of on the absolute run?
Yeah, well, so if I remember correctly, we crossed the tail end of March, about a week and a half before that. And no one was in country at that point. The invasion hadn't really begun. Several days into us doing missions in Iraq are when the first cruise missiles and the US first started doing airstrikes, both off ships and airframes. And then a couple more days after that is when the invasion started from the south. So the bulk of the US forces progressed from Kuwait north. And then we did some incursions into the Kurdistan region in northern Iraq, with both special operations linking up with Kurdish forces and kind of fighting from the top down up there. But yeah, out west, it was us, an element of 5th Special Forces Group, a company of Army Rangers, and that was about it.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but I did some reading when we reached out for the interview, and you were there the night that